Conference action begins this weekend in the SEC with Tennessee visiting Florida in the Swamp. Grace Harmington here with Jacob Rudner of Gators 247 and Patrick Brown of Go Vols 247. Now they say only Gators make it out alive, and that may be true in the Vols case. Florida has won 9 straight in Gainesville. The Vols' last win here was 2003. So let's break down this game a little bit. Always a heated rivalry here. Tennessee won last year's meeting, but has won just 2 of the last 18 meetings. So Patrick, what does this edition of the rivalry mean for these teams?
Well, Grace, the Florida game is always really important to Tennessee, really because, like you said, they don't win it very often, just twice in the past 18 seasons. Tennessee last won in Gainesville in 2003, and typically when the Vols go down to the Swamp, they kind of self-destruct, and it goes very poorly. So, but in Tennessee's case, I think they've kind of moved ahead of Florida right now. Obviously, you go back to that game 2 seasons ago in 2021 that Tennessee lost, and since that game, I think Tennessee's 18-6, and Florida is 10-14. So that was sort of a jumping-off point for Josh Heupel's tenure at Tennessee. They won the next 2 games after that. They didn't feel like they played very well in that game. And really, if you're Tennessee, you're trying to keep it that way. You feel like you're ahead of Florida right now. You beat them last season, and you don't want this to be a jumping off point for Billy Napier early in his second season. So to keep things as they are right now, you've got to go down and buck some bad history, because you've had a really tough time going down to Gainesville over the past 20 years.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of that holds true for Florida as well. Historically, this is just a very relevant matchup for the Gators. It's one that they feel they need to win every year, and lately they've done a very good job of that. Like everybody has said, only losing a couple times over the course of the last 2 decades. But this year could be different, like Patrick said. This is a Gator team that is not among its better groups in recent seasons. We saw them struggle quite heavily at Utah to open up the season. And Tennessee is a good squad. I think that there's still some questions to be answered, with its passing attack. But as far as meaning for this game, the Gators really are just looking for, a big win, an opportunity to beat a ranked opponent in the Swamp. Slow start to the season. Of course, they get a win back against McNeese State, but I don't think Florida fans are really counting that for much. And this is just an opportunity not only to secure a rivalry victory, which would be Billy Napier's first of his tenure, but just some momentum going into the thick of this Gator schedule, which gets quite difficult against ranked SEC opponents. Won't be an easy group, but the Gators should be able to kind of, get some solid footing with a victory here. And even with a loss, solid play, I think, would do wonders for this group.
A win would be huge for Billy Napier, and that starts with Graham Mertz taking over his offense. He arrived in Gainesville without much pomp and circumstance, but he threw a career-high 333 passing yards in that Utah loss, and through 2 games has a completion percentage of 73.8. So, Jacob, how do you feel about Mertz and this Gator offense against Tennessee?
I like what Mertz has done through 2 weeks. It's hard to argue against his stats. Like you said, completing almost 75% of his passes, threw for a career high in yardage in his first game as a Gator, eclipsing that 300-yard mark. One thing, though, that I would caution people against when it comes to maybe getting a little bit of confidence when it comes to Mertz is just how exactly he's getting to those completion numbers. Yes, this is what Florida is asking, but the reality is that he's been mostly successful in that 0 to 9 yard range in Florida's passing attack. That isn't necessarily going to get it done every game. It didn't get it done at Utah, where Florida only scored a late touchdown that ended up being, inconsequential. And it worked against McNeese State, which is just not a very valuable opponent. I do wonder how Florida will be able to pass the ball against a team like Tennessee that has been stout defensively, especially against the pass. Will Graham Mertz be able to be more effective in the explosive category? That's something Billy Napier said he would be watching for this week, and I certainly think it's important.
Yeah, Jacob, I think if you're Tennessee, you have to use a lot of the same blueprint you used in this matchup last season, where you're gearing up to try to take away Florida from running the football with Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne, and you want to put the game in the hands of Graham Mertz. And I think Tennessee's defense is still, we don't know really how good they are. They played Virginia, who is not a very good offensive team, particularly on the offensive line, and then Austin Peay is an FCS team. So that said, Tennessee's defensive line has been really, really good. 11 sacks and 25 tackles for loss through 2 games. They've been really disruptive up front. They've got really good depth on the defensive line. They're big, they're athletic. They've got some pass rushers that have come on. James Pierce Jr. is a sophomore that was a former top 247 prospect that's got 3 sacks already. Looks like he's off to a breakout season. Arizona State transfer Omar Norman Lott has been really disruptive, and they've really been disruptive all across the board. So I think if you're Tennessee, you're feeling pretty good about your defensive line, trying to take away Florida's run game and making Graham Mertz beat you. And Anthony Richardson almost did it last season. He threw for 453 yards, and Florida had a chance to win that game late. But if you're Tennessee, you're able to take away the run, get Florida in 3rd and long, then your pass rushers can tee off on Mertz and try to rattle him and get him to make some mistakes.
Now, guys, it feels like most people are waiting for, whether it's Tennessee fans or fans of the Heupel offense, maybe fans of just a lot of scoring in general. They're waiting for the pyrotechnics of this Tennessee passing attack. But let's not forget, that all starts with the run game, which is working for the Vols. 4th most rush yards in the nation, averaging 6.1 yards a carry. Patrick, how do you feel about how this offense is producing so far and about this matchup against the Gators?
Well, Grace, there's been a lot of angst in Knoxville since that Austin Peay game where the offense really never got out of second gear. And you mentioned the pyrotechnics. We became so accustomed to watching Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt generate all these big plays last season. Tennessee had 55 plays of pass plays, I should say, of 20-plus yards last season. I think 27 pass plays of 40-plus yards. Through 2 games this season, they have just 4 pass plays of 20 yards and 2 of 40 yards. So the explosive plays have not been there. I think defenses have sat with 2 high safeties. They played soft on the perimeter with their cornerbacks, and they basically said, you're not going to home run us into oblivion like so many teams had happened to them last season. What that has done is it's opened up the run game, as you mentioned. Jalen Wright's averaging more than 9 yards a carry. Jabari Small is averaging more than 6 yards per carry. Tennessee's offensive line has executed pretty well without preseason All-SEC center Cooper Mays. But they've got to get the pass game going. They've got to hit some of those deep shots when they're there. And they've got to make some plays over the middle of the field as well. There were some misfires from Joe Milton against Austin Peay, some drops that have contributed to the slow start for the passing game. And that's been a cause of concern through 2 games. But we know Heupel's offense is going to get guys open, and Milton's got to be accurate with the football, and his guys got to make some plays for him on the outside starting in this game, or Tennessee's offense may not be able to reach as close to that level as last season when they led the country in scoring.
And while Tennessee might not be as potent through the air as it perhaps was last year, I still think that this is a group that poses a significant threat to Florida, just again because of that run game. They've been so effective, 4th in the country in rushing yards per contest. Florida struggled in that capacity last year, stopping the run. I think defensive line was a real big factor in that, and that is something that Florida has shored up prior to the 2023 season. That being said, this is a challenging matchup because Florida will have to make decisions with how it wants to defend the perimeter, whether it wants to go man-on with very solid Tennessee receivers and try and make them beat one-on-one matchups, or are they going to go with a little bit more of a zone concept that's going to allow them to have a little more protection in the secondary? I would tend to think that the Gators are going to be a little more aggressive in their scheme, play a little bit more man coverage on the perimeter, and try and stack the box in an effort to slow down the Tennessee run game, just because, again, that's so important. And if Tennessee is able to generate success on the ground, it could open things up via play action and in a passing game that hasn't exactly been very consistent, but certainly could pick Florida apart, if it really gets into gear. And Florida will have to be careful of that. It hurt them last year, and it could do it again this year, too.
All right, now that we've looked at these offenses versus defensive matchups, give me your X factor in this game, the player who could be the difference maker. Jacob, start us off.
Well, over the last 2 weeks, we have heard this name a whole bunch in Gainesville, and that's freshman wideout Eugene Wilson III. Just an explosive athlete, especially for his age. Does a really good job of understanding the field and where he needs to be and when. His timing is impeccable for a freshman, and really living up to that 4-star billing as a prospect. 24/7 Sports had him just outside the top 100, and for good reason. Just a well-regarded player due to his speed. His catch radius is great despite having a 5'10 stature. But the thing that really makes him the X factor for this game is how Florida will be able to use him in terms of its creativity. Will it get him snaps out of the backfield? It did that a couple times against McNeese. Just an explosive athlete with game-changing speed who can really break a defense either over the top in the passing game or in that run replacement area with the screen passes and maybe even some handoffs. This is somebody who I think could absolutely change the result of this game for Florida if he has a nice performance.
Jacob, I'll follow your lead and pick a young player for Tennessee too, and linebacker Elijah Herring. He's a sophomore, so he's been in the program for a little bit longer than Wilson, but this is going to be his second start in the middle of Tennessee's defense, which lost Keenan Peely to an arm injury in the opener against Virginia. He's going to be out for the foreseeable future. So Herring is going to be the guy. He made his first start against Austin Peay last week. He's a big physical linebacker, 6'3", 238. This is going to be a good matchup for him in some respects because Florida's going to want to run the ball downhill with those running backs, but they're also going to do some misdirection and throw some different formations at Tennessee. And Herring's going to have his eyes in the right place and be a vocal communicator on the road in a hostile environment. I know it won't be loud when Florida has the football, but Herring's still got to make sure that he does his part to get Tennessee on the same page, all three levels of the defense, and he's got to make sure individually that he's in his right gaps against the run to keep Florida from getting the run game going downhill. So this is a big spot for him, and he's got to deliver for Tennessee's defense.
All right, great stuff as always, guys. Jacob Rudner, Patrick Brown, thanks for joining us. And remember, keep it locked into Gators 24/7 and Go Vols 24/7 for more coverage of this game and all your Gators and Vols football coverage all season long.